Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another Inner Hour this week. We appreciate it. So, most of you, if not all of you, have, maybe not all of you, most of you have been here before, so welcome here. We do a once a week on Friday nights from 7 to 8. We do something called Inner Hour that is part of our one-by-one ministry that we do. And anyone's welcome. The link goes out every Tuesday. And it's the same link throughout the whole year. It's a calendar year at a time. So if you have the link for tonight, that will be good for the rest of this year. Then in 2025, a different link. But they're sent out every Tuesday anyway, so you don't have to keep track of it. And you're welcome to share it with anybody you think would be interested. So the only difference in format is on the first Fridays of the month. We do what I call an interactive Inner Hour. The other ones, like tonight, will be me doing a reading, doing a commentary on the reading, doing a period of meditation, and then a little closing. On the first Fridays of the month, we do an interactive one where I start with a short prayer, introduce a topic or a theme or a question for group discussion. Then we invite everybody to turn on your cameras and microphones and share your ideas, questions, wisdom with the rest of us. So, as always, I like to start with a little candle lighting prayer here. And I invite you to, you're welcome to do the same if you like that sort of thing where you are. But I invite you to take a couple of moments as I do this to give yourself a little breather from the day, from the week, from whatever stresses of life and the world you may be carrying, so that for the next hour you can just set those aside and focus on being present with this divine spirit that is within each one of us and abides among us all, and just resting in that spirit. So, welcome to the inner hour. And while One by One is not a Jewish organization, this is on Friday nights. Traditionally, in the Jewish tradition, Friday night to Saturday night is their period of Shabbat or Sabbath or rest from responsibilities in creation in the world. And so for those of you who practice that, I know some of you do, many of us practice different mystical traditions we find meaningful without necessarily being part of the, formally being part of that particular faith from which that tradition comes. And also tonight, for those of you who may be aware or may not, this is the eve of something called Yom Kippur, which is one of the holiest days in the Jewish calendar, both ancient, clear back to the days of Moses, and also observed in the time of Jesus and all of his apostles and friends and family. And still, in effect, in today's Judaism, it's the Day of Atonement, and it's a time of introspection about how we've lived our lives this past year and how we hope to live our lives in the year to come, about recognizing the need to ask for forgiveness wherever that is in our life, whether it's forgiveness from God, forgiveness from other people, and also to extend forgiveness to those that have somehow hurt or wounded us in some way, intentionally or unintentionally, so that we hopefully can start the year in a reconciled state and not carry any of those unforgiven things within us toward ourselves, toward others, or toward God into this new year, so that we can start kind of with a clean slate, so to speak. So, so that's for those of you who don't practice that. This is still a wonderful weekend to spend some time, because there's so much energy from centuries and thousands of years of millions of Jews in past and present, having this be a time when that energy is really present to work with forgiveness, to work with reorienting our life in a more holy, loving, kind way for the year to come. It's a great time to do that, whether you have any connection to Judaism or not. So I encourage you to spend some introspective time this weekend and spend some time paying attention to what aspects of forgiveness may be important but unresolved in your life right now. So that's just an aside. That's not really the theme of tonight. Sometimes I read longer passages, often from the Bible, sometimes from other inspirational works, and sometimes I do sort of theme readings. This one is a thematic reading. The theme tonight is God's will, and I only have a few, and they're all really short readings. But as a kind of an intro to that, I want to mention that in religious and spiritual circles, God's will is something that's frequently talked about, and different traditions have different ways of emphasizing it and different understandings of what that is. Pardon for just a moment. Lovely hot tea my wife made, thank you. And I grew up in very traditional, my spiritual education as it was a very traditional mainstream Christian one. My parents weren't particularly observant, actually. They weren't really devout in any way, but they felt like that was part of what you did to bring up a child in the 50s and 60s, so they did that. And then later, I got much more involved in as an adult, much more involved in my personal studies of what does all this mean, and studied lots of world religions and lots of mystical traditions and practices, basically meaning those practices that emphasize how to have a direct encounter with the divine yourself, as opposed to believing this or that, or believing what somebody else says about it. How do we find that ourselves? How do we have that experience? And so before I do the readings, just a couple of quick notes. Depending on how you grew up and what you took in from that, you may not have any real reference points to this at all, or you may have lots of them, and they may be very positive and helpful and uplifting, or they may be actually kind of impediments to your spiritual growth and study. One of the things that, in my personal experience with that, was often associated with God's will is the notion of sacrifice. That somehow, to please God, I had to give up something I really liked. I had to sacrifice something. I had to sacrifice whatever, my money. I had to sacrifice my desire. I had to sacrifice my opinion about things. I had to sacrifice what I wanted to do with my life so that I could do whatever God wanted me to do with my life. And it usually involved something not fun, not easy, and not pleasant, because that would be God's will, is to do something really holy, but if I wasn't feeling holy, I usually interpreted those things as burdensome and not pleasant and difficult and so on. So I have part of my association with that was a negative connotation of, you have to somehow suffer to be able to really do God's will. And then I also was exposed to the ideas of God's ways are not our ways, and so what God's will is may be very, very different than what we understand or want, but that ultimately it's for our best and highest good, and so we should seek out that will and try to discover what it is and try to find it and incorporate that into our lives, and to keep seeking that, to keep seeking guidance as to what God's will for me is. So that was, for me, a very positive take on it, and that is also part of my education and background and experience with the idea of God's will. And another part of God's will, maybe some of these will relate to you. This is what I'm trying to say. Maybe some of you have this background, and if you do, some of it may be really helpful, and some of it may be things you want to look at not being bound by anymore, because they spiritually don't help you connect and grow. They kind of tend to inhibit that. But another aspect of God's will is often associated with judgment. That if you don't do God's will and do it right, God's going to get you. I actually know people. I grew up with a neighbor, really nice people, by the way, family people, and the mom was a very, very, very traditional but devout fundamentalist Christian, and it was common to hear her say, if a child or person was doing something she didn't approve of, it was very common to hear her say, "God's going to get you for that." So there's that kind of fear component to God's will of, I better do this just right. And then Christian theology is, this is a oversimplification reduction of a lot, but in essence, the idea that you have to believe the right thing, which is that Jesus is the one and only Savior for all time. And then you get to go to heaven and forever and everything's wonderful. Or if you don't believe that, it doesn't matter what else you do or don't do or how good a person you are, nothing else matters. That on that criteria, then if you don't accept that and don't believe it, then you go to hell and are literally tortured forever. So that was one aspect of the teaching. Even as a really, really young child, I remember thinking that absolutely can't be right. That can't be right. So lots of different aspects of God's will and lots of different understandings of it. So right before the readings, the one other piece I want to share is an understanding that I've come to gradually over the years that has helped me a great deal. And it's very, very simple, but because it rings true for me, it's important. And I guess the simplest, most direct way to say it is, God's will is that loving kindness be manifest. That simple. So all of a sudden, what's God's will for me in this situation? It's that I be as kind and loving as possible, as I'm able to. Maybe you could be more so, but how much can I be that in this situation? Maybe in another situation, a much more comfortable, easy one for me, I could be bring forth much more love, much more kindness into that scenario. But in this situation where I'm frightened or in pain or disturbed or very uncomfortable, maybe in this situation I can't do that. I'm not much in touch with that. So, but any part of it that I can bring forward is better than bringing forward nothing of it. So if God's will is that love be made manifest, then that simplifies a great deal of things. It simplifies choices. What's God's will for me in this choice? Should I take that job or this job? Should I, get together with that person or this person? Should I, whatever? Many of those things have a component of what makes you feel the greatest inner peace and joy with that decision. What allows you to feel the greatest freedom to express who you are in that job or that neighborhood or this relationship? What allows you to really open to take down a lot of those inner walls we put around our heart to protect ourselves and really open to this radiant, loving presence of the divine in ourselves and in others, and to be able to take that in from God to us and also from others to us, to not wall ourselves off from that, but to be open to it. So what kind of decision helps me to do that? That's the most loving decision, and therefore that, in that scenario, is God's will for me. And also in that scenario, it cannot be God's will for me to do something or want something or achieve something that causes damage to other innocent people. That can't be part of it, because that's not a manifestation of loving kindness. So those are some of my background and my understanding now of what God's will is all about. So let me read you some of these things. This is there's actually, interestingly enough, 2 from the Old Testament and 2 from the New. The Old Testament being a Christian term, by the way, which most Jews kind of find offensive, as if it doesn't matter anymore, and it's the ancient one that wore out. And now we have a new and improved model, But the Christian Bible, as such, there are many different Christian Bibles actually, but the Christian Bible contains the Jewish Bible, which Christians call the Old Testament, and then it creates the New Testament, the part about the life and teachings of Jesus, or at least a view of his life and teachings. There were many other views of his life and teachings that were prevalent in his lifetime and shortly thereafter that did not end up becoming part of Christian teaching. So this is from the New Testament, a letter. It's from First Thessalonians. Thessalonia was a city, and this was a letter written to a group of people there. So this is First Thessalonians 5:18. Give thanks in all circumstances, for that is God's will for you. There you go. Another statement of God's will. To be grateful in all circumstances. I don't know how easy that is for you to do, but it's definitely not easy for me to do. It's plenty of circumstances are easy for me to do that. When I'm sitting at home, like tonight with my wife and our dog and our cat, who pretty much distance herself from anything that doesn't occur in her domain up in this part of the house. Easy for me to be grateful for our home, for one another, for our health, for all these different things. Plenty of situations where it's really hard for me to find gratitude when painful or frightening things happen to me or people I care about. And yet, that's the teaching. So sometimes my experience is that sometimes I just am not paying attention. I am not noticing all the blessings I have. I'm not remembering who I am or who my wife is or who, I'm not, or who God is. I'm not aware. I'm caught up in something of my own self-obsession, worrying about my health or worrying about my money or worrying about something that I want to happen that isn't happening the way I want, or worrying about the world because it's certainly not happening the way I want right now. And getting so caught up in that I lose awareness of the wonderful presence, of the wonderful blessings that I have in my life. And so simply just waking up again or remembering, and then gratitude floods in. And then sometimes the gratitude that I find is gratitude for what I don't have, which sounds maybe odd. I don't have many things that would be terrible if I had to bear them. I'm not living in poverty. I'm not living in a high crime area. I'm not living in a war zone. I am not incapacitated. I am not mentally or physically unable to live my life and make my own choices. I'm not destitute. I'm not without people who care about me. I'm not suffering from something that's horrible. I'm not, you get the point, right? You can name many, many things. I happen to belong to a gym, which I started after my heart attack. I should have started way before that. I might not have had one, but the gym is actually a handicap gym. That was how it was initially set up, and the Special Olympics here are held there and all that. And every time I go in there, even the times I go in kind of grumbling and tired, it's like, I don't want to do this. I look around and see people that can't walk, people that can't talk, people that can't eat by themselves. And I think, oh my God, I am just so fortunate. So sometimes the gratitude is for what we don't have in our life. The next one is from the Jewish Bible or Old Testament, and it's from Proverbs 3:5. And this will sound really surprising because the First Thessalonians was written in 1st century AD during the generation of Jesus. This was written during the generation of Solomon, well over 1,000 years before that. And this says, give thanks in all circumstances. So it's like, okay, so there's a theme here that's didn't originate with Jesus. It's very old, and of course it didn't even originate in Judaism, but this idea of being grateful. The next one is from the New Testament. It's from the first letter of Peter 2:15. And this is a slightly different aspect. It is God's will that by doing good, you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. That's kind of these days, that would probably be labeled hate speech, or I need to go find my safe space, because it's upsetting. But because there's a lot of difference today in our willingness to hear challenging ideas than even a few generations ago. Not to make fun of people who genuinely have trouble emotionally dealing with things. There's a lot of other stuff going on in some of those scenarios. So it is God's will that by doing good. So first of all, here we have an unstated corollary, which is part of God's will is that you do good in your life. And it is God's will that by doing that good, you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. So, what does that mean? I mean, wouldn't it be great if you could just do good things and all of a sudden all of the foolish, mean, cruel, ignorant talk that we see in the world would stop? I mean, would that be great or what? So I'm all for this. Let's try this. Let's have a campaign. See how much good we can do to reduce some of these things in our world. But the ignorant talk of foolish people, again, is not new. It's not a new challenge that humanity is facing. It's been around everywhere in every culture for thousands of years. There have always been, and continue to be, people who act as if they're experts on something and know what they're talking about, and they really don't, and they're not. There have been talk of people who make really poor and foolish choices and advocate others to do that. Partly what this was talking about in this age was people that were saying that the Hebrew God, the Jewish God, did not exist, wasn't real, because, again, many other gods and goddesses in that day and age were pantheistic in the sense that, the sun was God, the waters were God, the earth was God or goddess. All these things were gods and goddesses. And the Jewish God was an invisible, omnipresent, everywhere God, which was actually in human history unique. And many people are like, that's a bunch of nonsense. You have a God you can't hear and you can't see and you can't touch, and what kind of God is that? So the idea that God didn't exist, or that God didn't care about them, or God wouldn't intercede in their life was not uncommon. And so in this particular passage, what's being talked about is people who are saying things that what you have faith in and what you experience isn't real. And there are still people that say that. And then the last reading is from the Old Testament again. It's the last prophet in the Old Testament. And that's the end of the Jewish Bible. And then if you have a Christian Bible, then the next section is the New Testament about Jesus. So this is Micah 6:8. And it says, "The Lord has shown you what is good and what the Lord requires of you." So it's phrased a little differently because it doesn't say God's will here, but what God requires of you certainly seems to me to be thematically very similar, if not identical, to what God wants of you, which is another word, a way of saying what God's will is for you to do. God has shown you what is good and what the Lord requires of you. And then here is that. This is what God wants of you. And there are three things. This is elsewhere in the Bible as well, but this is the most quoted passage about it. To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. So this is another way of saying that God's will is to do these three things. To act justly. So I don't know exactly how you would understand that. To me, to act justly would imply that I was treating people equitably and fairly. I wasn't taking advantage of someone by misrepresenting a product or a service, or taking advantage of something I knew they didn't know, that they'd make a different choice that would not benefit me if they knew it, so I don't tell them, and I let them make that choice that benefits me but not them. Of not dealing with prejudice, that I'm not going to be honest with you or deal fairly with you or deal with you at all, perhaps, because you don't look like I think you should. You're the wrong color, the wrong race, the wrong sex, the wrong ethnicity, the wrong belief, the wrong religion, the wrong politic, all the forms of judgment that we have. You don't like the same sports team I like, so I don't like you. So I'm gonna deal differently with you. Is not acting justly. To love mercy is a great phrase. A little more specifically, the Hebrew part of this, because it was written in Hebrew, the Jewish Bible. It really is saying, the word there is chesed, and it means, in English, probably the best translation is loving kindness. So it really says to love loving kindness, which sounds redundant, but actually it's not. To love that aspect of God, to love that aspect of life, to love being able to perform acts of loving kindness, to be able to receive acts of loving kindness, to appreciate and love that that's possible, that we can actually choose that. And then the third one is to walk humbly with your God. Humility is a very big and prevalent theme in all spiritual literature that I have ever studied. It is highly emphasized, highly encouraged. And the opposite of that, this self-centered, self-obsessed, self-absorbed, me, maybe we might call it egotistical, whatever word we use, that's the opposite of walking humbly with your God. And another aspect of walking humbly with your God is to be humble about your relationship with God and what you know and understand of God. So that, from my perspective at least, part of living humbly with my God is, I know what I know of God and I know the relationship I have, so I just live that. I don't need to convince you of what I know about God. I don't need to try to persuade you to believe the things I believe. I don't need to contest your beliefs and try to prove you wrong. I don't need to enter into argument with you or opposition to you if you look at things differently than I do. And I don't have to advocate, hey, look at my wisdom. Wow, I've got this all figured out. I got it. You don't. I get it. My group gets it. My church gets it. My synagogue gets it. My way is right. You don't know what you're talking about. Listen to us. We got this all straightened out. That is the opposite of walking humbly with your God. The idea that we are supposed to flaunt our spiritual knowledge or our spiritual wisdom is the opposite of spiritual wisdom, and definitely the opposite of humility. So if someone asks what you believe, what you understand, what you know about a spiritual teaching, about God, about something in that arena of life, then by all means share that with them as honestly and directly as you can, bearing in mind what you know of their level of understanding and consciousness. If Stephen Hawking were still alive and he were sitting here in my office with me, and I asked him about super REM string theory, he could tell me a lot about it. And 99% of it would, it's like not a clue what this man just said. don't have the math skills, don't get it. So him trying to explain to me his level of understanding would do me no good at all. But if he was skillful, he would be able to take something very elaborate and complex and give me a piece of it that I could get. It's like, oh, I get that. And I then have a stepping stone to start building on a deeper understanding. So when we're trying to respond to people's inquiries about what we know and what we've studied and what we've experienced, I'm not saying water down, so don't think I'm saying that. What I'm saying is try to adjust what you're sharing or teaching or telling someone who's asked. Try to adjust that as best you can with sensitivity, not assuming they're adult and don't know anything, but trying to, from what you know of them, trying to adjust it in a framework that gives them something to get a hold of, that they can work with. And then if it's clear they're getting that, then you can give them something else. And if it's clear they're not getting it, then take a step back and try to reorient that and try to give them something in a way they can take it in. One good sign, if you're having a spiritual conversation with somebody and you see their eyes start to glaze over and kind of gaze into the infinite distance, that's a pretty good clue they're done. And either they're not interested or they're not grasping what you're saying. So time to stop, putting that on them. Someone's request to know what you know, to have you share how you feel or believe about something, is not an invitation to indoctrinate them into your way or to try to frighten or force or tempt them into believing your way. The goal is to try to share something really valuable that you've discovered in a way that you hope will be of use to them also. So, to walk humbly with our God is an attitude of humility in the first place. And part of that is a recognition that there is a great deal of life that we are clueless about, no matter how wise and well studied we are. And there's a great depth and height and breadth of God that we have yet to experience that's still a mystery. And there is also an awareness that despite how much we might long to, for our own good or for the good of someone we really love, life is beyond our control. It just is. It's not in our hands. We can't create life. We can't direct how life with a big L unfolds. We can take dominion over the things that we're given responsibility for, including our own attitude and our own willingness. But the big life is not in our hands. And that, if nothing else, should bring us some sense of humility. So, one other little personal tidbit, for what it's worth, is kind of be wary, because I haven't always been, kind of be wary of teachers, ministers, priests, rabbis, whoever, somebody in spiritual authority positions. Be wary of people who talk very nonchalantly and casually about how intimate a relationship with God they have. It's like, oh yeah, I was hanging out with God the other day and I said blah, blah, blah. Thinking about God, it's easy to do that. Thinking of God as your friend is a good thing. But that's all thinking about. In my life, and the life of many people I know, when they have had a profound and direct encounter with the reality of the divine, which we'll say is God, whatever, this real thing, this real living God, whether you encounter that in an awesome moment of nature, whether you encounter it in prayer or meditation, whether you encounter it holding your newborn grandchild, however you encounter it, it's not a casual, nonchalant thing. It is a powerful, deeply moving, deeply humbling, deeply grateful, all accepting, all encompassing experience of awe. It's very different than thinking about it. So, for people who speak and teach casually as if they've got God all figured out, and they're like chummy buddies and just hanging out all the time, I do encourage you to have an ongoing, everyday relationship and dialogue with God. But even in that, there's a humility present. And when that presence really comes into your consciousness and you really feel it, it's an overwhelming thing. It's not an achievement of yours. So, so this being the beginning, at least, of the Jewish New Year, it's a good time for all of us to take stock of what we've done in the past year and where we want to head and how we want to be, how we want to live our life, who we are, and how we want to represent who we are in our life in the year to come. So asking, in whatever way is genuine for you, asking for that internal guidance from the Holy Spirit, from God, from the divine, from your higher self. We put lots of words and labels on these things, but the essence is that which is greater than you, out of which you came and which sustains you. Asking that for strength and guidance and wisdom in the year ahead of how to live your life, and trying to pay attention to that with gratitude, with giving thanks, with being humble, with trying to do good, with trying to treat people fairly and justly. So I encourage you to take a look at that this weekend and move in that direction of being vigilant about trying to align yourself with the best in you, with the deep reality of your being a child of God, with the deep reality of this life of yours, whatever your present circumstance, is a profound gift. And don't miss it and don't waste it. So, with that, we're going to move into a little period of silent meditation. Going to sort of guide us in, and then I'll tell you when we're done and bring us back out. So just invite you to close your eyes. For most of you, this is a very common practice. If it isn't, just go with this and see how it works with you. Just close your eyes and notice that as you do, probably you're going to be aware of having many thoughts, many ideas sparking around in there, perhaps many emotions stirring, good, bad, troubled, calm, and probably a lot of physical stuff with your body. It has an itch, it's tired of sitting, it's getting hungry, it needs to go to the bathroom, whatever may be going on. You probably notice there's a lot of stuff going on inside you. And as we try to pay attention to what's happening within us, I just invite you to look for a deeper place. For many, it's helpful to imagine a place very, very deep in the very center of your brain, in the very center of your organ of consciousness. And as you move deeper toward that center, there's a greater and greater quietude and a greater and greater stillness, where some of those other things, these endless thoughts, endless figuring out, endless fixing, endless feeling, endless physical needs, where those begin to just recede more into the background of your consciousness instead of in the forefront. And as you move into this deeper place within you, there is a greater sense of peace. There is a greater sense of buoyancy with far fewer burdens, a greater sense of freedom and expansiveness and welcoming into higher vistas of experience and understanding, an invitation to go beyond yourself and begin to let the Spirit of God really come alive in your awareness and invite it to work in you through your mind, through your heart, through your body, in your life. And keep moving to that deepest place in you where there really is a place of rest from all the trouble, a place of safety, a place of being loved and accepted. A place where the essence of your being and the essence of the one that created you blend together. And in that deep place of connection, we can just sit in silence, asking that God reveal to us whatever needs to be revealed, heal whatever needs healing, instruct us in whatever we need to learn, and be with us through it all. So let's just begin to bring our attention back once more. So this is just going to sing a song and then make a short announcement, and we'll wrap up for this evening. But this is actually the Lord's Prayer in the original language, which was Hebrew. Avinu, 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 Shebashamayim, Yitkadash Shemcha, Yitkadash Shemcha, Tavo Malchutecha, Yaseh Ratzonecha, Kebashamayim, Kem ba'aretz, Et lechem hukenu, Ten lanu hayom, Usalach lanu al chataenu, Kamo shesochim gam anachnu lahotim lanu. Val tevienu lidai nisayon, ki im chaltsenu min hara, ki im chaltsenu min hara. Lidai nisayon, ki im haltsenu min hara, ki lahamamlecha v'hagavura v'hatiferet, ki lahamamlecha v'hagavura v'hatiferet. Leomai olamim, Leomai olamim, Leomai olamim. Amen. So, I hope you have a blessed week, a week of good health and peace and a lot of love in your life. I wanted to make sure to invite you, if you're in the local area, tomorrow evening is actually tomorrow's Yom Kippur. Tomorrow evening is the end of Yom Kippur, and at the conclusion of that, we're doing a special service at the Unity here in Fort Wayne. It's from 7 to 8:30 p.m. tomorrow night. You're welcome to come even if you haven't signed up. And it basically consists of a brief explanation about Yom Kippur, then a kind of an internal process of self-evaluation, and then a special candle ceremony, a very ancient guided meditation about the transition between the previous year and the year to come and where you stand with that within yourself. So it's kind of a longer guided meditation. It's probably about 25 minutes. And then we wrap up with actually the shofar, which is a traditional ram's horn instrument that's sounded. So whether you're Jewish or not, you're very welcome to come as an inner introspective process and a kind of a way to reorient for the next 12-month cycle. Then on Sunday, I'm the guest speaker at also Unity. Their Sunday morning services are at 10:30, and you're welcome to show up for that. It's not Jewish, and so you're invited to come to that. Their service is about an hour long, typically, sometimes a little bit more. And also a reminder, in case anybody doesn't know, One by One does record these inner hours, except for the group sharing ones, to protect people's privacy. So they're all recorded and then posted on One by One's YouTube website, or YouTube site. YouTube channel, that's the word. Posted on YouTube's channel. So if you ever want to look at one, like you missed one and would like to see it, or you, for some reason, found one especially interesting or moving, want to look at it again, you can. If you don't already have the YouTube information about how to find our channel, just text or email us and we'll send it to you. It's really, really easy. So I think that's all the announcements. And that worked out well because it's 8 o'clock. So thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful week. I really appreciate you spending Friday evening with me. I enjoy these, and I enjoy getting to share with you, and I know your participation is silent in the non-interactive ones, but I really value your presence because you are participating very much, and I really appreciate your being here. So, all right. Thank you. God bless. I'm going to end the recording and hopefully see some of you this weekend and the rest of you hopefully next week. Bye.